Yo, what is up? Hey, good morning and welcome back to another live stream here on Free Will Photos. Today, what we're going to be doing is diving into ON1 Photo Raw and taking a look at the 2024 pre-release version, which we're going to be modifying some layers. I'm going to try and explain it, demystify it. So drop your questions down in the comment section below. Now, if for some reason you do not have ON1 Photo Raw 2024 and you want to save a little bit of money, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20 when you check out. It'll save you some money. I know that there's some currency exchange challenges or differences, but it'll save you a little bit of money regardless of what currency you're using. So let's go ahead and jump into the computer, which is right here. And you can see that I have ON1 Photo Raw 2024 pulled up. Again, I do have to note that this is pre-release software. There was a little bit of a hiccup, but nonetheless, the idea is that you understand how the layers pane works. So I've already made this image. I actually made this morning. Took me about 30 minutes or so of just fiddling around, and what I was going with is just something that brings the context of you're going through time travel, and I was just messing around. So wanted to make a composite image, and that's what this is. So let me go ahead and show you what I started with from the beginning, and then as I walk you through this, you will see how I build everything up in the layers pane. And that's actually the first point that I want to make about layers, is the fact that you can use layers to build up your image. So if you have an idea of what you want to do to an image, then maybe the layers pane is helpful, especially when it comes to combining multiple images, one or more. In this context, I actually used the same image multiple times over. So this was the base image of the watch. There's nothing that I did to this image. I left it completely alone. No local adjustments, no effects. But that's one of the benefits of using layers, is on each of these layers, I get an instance of my develop, my local, and all of the effects and things of that sort. So when you get to using layers, this could be of benefit to you, something that you may be interested in using. So there is that idea as well. Now, what I did next was I added in this dust particle layer. And if I turn off this layer, you can see that I have this dust particle layer, and you can also see it cut out here. I'll explain that in a second. Again, one of the benefits of using the layer. But I put the dust on top of the background layer, and that just gave an atmosphere, a texture. You could absolutely do this with a texture effect as well, but I wanted to showcase why using layers is either one, something that we do, and then two, how you can do it. But on top of that, what I did was I added in some effects. So if I come over here to my dust layer, I click the little chevron that is to the far right. It will expose all of the options that I modified at some point. And you can see I have effects, I have dynamic contrast and photo filter. So if I turn off both of those, you can see kind of what happens to this particular layer. With the photo filter off and on, you can see how that kind of plays out. And then dynamic contrast just makes those particles pop a little bit more. Again, could have done this all with using the texture layer, or I'm sorry, texture effect, but I decided to go with a separate layer. So I'll go ahead and minimize this as well. But that's kind of where the beginning portion of layers. All right. What I can also do, and if you are using plugins, then this is a big deal. I've showcased this many times, but what I did here is this should be the stamped layer. I was supposed to relabel these so it'd be a little bit easier for me to talk you through everything. So this is a stamped layer that I sent into a plugin, and this is the dust and the background layer. So these two layers combine onto one. And if I turn this off, you can see I get nothing. If I turn it back on, I get everything. However, if I turn off the dust and BG layer, in fact, let me relabel this. There. So that way it's a little bit easier for me to tell that this is the dust and background stamped layer. So if I turn this off and on, you're not going to see a difference right now because the underlying layers are still working. Whatever's at the bottom of the layer stack is going to show through because that's like the base. All right. If I turn off the base, then I get nothing. But as soon as I turn on this stamped layer, you can see it's the combination of these two layers. I hope I'm explaining that well. If I'm not, then please let me know in the comment section, and I'll try my best to clarify that. But hopefully you are also able to see what's happening here and how this is working, so you can imagine what you can do with it in your own images. Now, what I did is I took this particular layer and I'll come up to layer, filters, and then I send it to Boris Effects. If you are working with plugins, I have to note that whenever your image comes back from that particular plugin, it's going to show up as a new layer. All right. That's very important for you to know if you're going to be using ON1 as a plugin, or I'm sorry, using plugins inside of ON1. So it's hosting the plugin. I'm going to go ahead and launch Boris Effects real quick, so that way you can see what I'm talking about here. All right. And here comes Boris Effects. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit yes, because this was the last image that I edited inside of Boris Effects. That way you can kind of see what I did here. So if I hit yes, it's going to take all of those previous edits, or at least it should. And I guess it doesn't want to cooperate with me today. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in Rainbow Glow. I think that's the one that I had in here. And of course, when I try to show you how this all works, things don't want to cooperate. But yeah, it was the Rainbow Glow. So I'll do that. And just for the sake of showing you how it comes in as a separate layer on, or a different layer, I'm going to do something like color shadow, because this will be very obvious when I send it back. So I'm just going to hit apply. And then Boris Effects is going to close. And it's just analyzing. And now I have this image back inside of ON1. And you can see this is the layer that it created with this effect on it. Now, this effect is kind of cool. Maybe we'll work it into the overall look a little bit later. I kind of like what it's doing to the watch face here. So maybe it'll be fun to play with some blend modes and opacity. But I'm going to turn that off, because the layer that actually came back from Boris Effects was this one. And this one actually has some effects on it. So again, if I click on the layer and then I come over to the little chevron, I can turn off the blur and the local adjustment layer as well, that I applied to it after I brought it back from Boris Effects. Because again, I was creating this composite image. All right. But if I want to turn on all of my effects, I can hit that button again, and I can also turn on the local adjustments. Good morning, Sam. And yeah, you know what? I got my coffee right here too. In fact, should have said cheers and then sip of coffee. All right. So I'm back with the layer, or the layer has come back from Boris Effects. I'm able to modify it and add different filters on top of it that are native to ON1 Photo Raw. And this is one of the benefits of working with plugins as well as layers. You start to get the best of every program world, so to speak. And that's one of the things I get very excited for, when I can combine multiple pieces of software to create a look that I couldn't get out of camera. So now that I have all of that situated, I have my local adjustment and my blur effect, which is just a radial blur, kind of giving that perception of movement. Well, obviously this looks a little weird. So what I did was I took the base image and I cut out the watch face itself. And it's just the watch face. So if I click on here, hit the letter O, you can see that I cut out the watch face. Now that I'm looking at this, I'm noticing I need to clean up this border area on this mask. So I'm going to hit the letter B on my keyboard to get the brush. And I am just going to go across the edges here really quickly. Let me make my brush larger so I can make quick work of this. Because I noticed it earlier, I just didn't feel like spending the time to try and correct it. And now that, we're live, I just wanted to show you that it can be corrected, modified, and, this is just reality that we live in if you're going to work like this. With that being said, I use the line mask tool to actually make this circle. So if you're wondering, like, Chris, how did you get such a perfect circle? All I did was I used the line mask tool and then I shaped it around the watch face, which it's not a perfect circle, but it's close enough. If you're interested in learning how to use the line mask tool, I can absolutely create a tutorial that kind of walks through that. But on the watch face itself, I actually put a few effects because the goal here was to try and blend it into the lighting that I created out of Boris Effects, which is a phenomenal piece of software. I love using it, not affiliated with them. I just love using the software. And when I want to do creative things like this, it just allows me to do so much. But nonetheless, if I turn off the effects on the watch face, you can see it just looks a little dull and plain. So I did put in a little bit of color over the top of the watch face. And that's just because I imagine this light was going to wrap around and it should probably make the top part glow, since the ring that's holding it is also glowing. And then I added in a little bit of dynamic contrast as well as sharpening to make it more crisp and make it pop. But what I also did is I lowered the opacity overall for this particular layer. And that's one of the beautiful things of working with layers, is that you get a set of opacity sliders as well as the ability to work with your blending. It's over here on this tab. Again, still getting used to where everything is. I'm pretty familiar, but if you're not familiar, this is the properties pane that pops out whenever you click on the mask icon, and it has your masking as well as your blend options for each of the layers. So with that being said, I also have it up here in the layers pane. So it's in two places when you're working with layers, but they both work the exact same way. So let me go ahead and show you the next step that I went to, which I took all of this and merged it into a single image, because now I believe I have my composite the way that I wanted it to be built. However, what I wanted was something a little bit more dramatic and colorful. So here's what I went ahead and did. I'll walk you through this. And I just love being able to for tutorial purposes, it's just amazing that I can click this little chevron, drop down these items here, and kind of talk you through what it is that I turned on or didn't turn on. So the first one, and tone and color, I know that I modified the tone and color. So it's not perfect, but you can see on this layer that I modified the tone and color, mostly the color. This is the composite layer, so I can't really turn that off and on. I wish I could to show you. I guess I could turn off the develop module as a whole. Nope, that doesn't work either. So yeah, sorry, can't do that. Hopefully in a later release, there will be a button for tone and color, or color and tone, where you can turn that off and on. It's kind of odd that they don't give you the ability to do that, and unless I'm missing something, but I don't think I am. So anyhow, the saturation, I did pull that down, or let me start from the top here. So I moved the tint more over to magenta, and that just helps with the magenta tones or colors that are in the background. I think that this really needed that particular push to the right in the magentas. And then I pulled down on the saturation, so that way it wasn't like this crazy colorful kaleidoscope of things, even though that's kind of what I was going for. And then I also added in some vibrance, and that just helps with the overall vibe of the colors. That's all I did with the develop for the overall editing of the, I guess, the stylized version of the composite. And then I added in a border, which I used the emulsion border, and that was mostly to hide these little areas here. And this is one of those cool things about effects or ON1 new layers pane, is that I can kind of just walk through here on each one of these layers and see what I'm doing. So I'll turn off the borders, and I added in some film grain because, and I don't know how much that's going to show up on your screen. Here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. So if we, and of course it zoomed me right back out. Come on, computer, you could do it. It's like technical difficulties, real life. All right, here we are. So if I turn off the film grain, I want you to look in this brighter area, this gradient from the bright to the darker area, and you should be able to see the grain kind of pop in there. When I was adding in the filter for the blur, I noticed that I was losing some of that texture in the overall image that I guess kind of made it feel less digital and more photo-esque. I don't know. Personal preference here. I threw in a little bit of grain just to add in some grit. I'll turn that off and on one more time so you can kind of see that. Hopefully through the YouTube compression, that's coming through and making sense. But if not, just know that it's there. It does work. And I really do enjoy having it there. And then I have the bleach bypass, which is a filter that I use whenever I want to really make the extreme left and right contrast type of image. So if I want to pull the highlights really, really far to the right and pull the shadows or the darks really, really far to the left, then that's when I turn on bleach bypass, because it just adds in like this dark, gritty type of contrast. Probably not the best way of explaining that, but the look, that's the best way that I can explain the particular look. So I'll go ahead and turn all of that back on, and I'll minimize the effects here. So overall, this is the final image. Now, with that being said, you have some options here in the layers pane. You can resize this. So if you have a lot of layers, you can pull this down. Just know that now to get to your controls, you're going to have to scroll through here. And if you're working in one of these controls that has a longer menu, then this could be a little bit of a challenge, frustration. But not a hard thing to overcome, just something to be aware of, right? When you start making decisions, just be aware of what that's going to impact for you. You can just pull this up and you can scroll through your layers. And this is actually a very common method of using layers in previous versions of previous versions of ON1. However, now that they allow us to resize the layer pane, you can make it just as large as you need it to be for your particular project. All right, so that's layers in a nutshell. You put something over here, you stack stuff on top of it, and then you can use blend modes, which I didn't showcase. So let me show you that really quickly. I'm going to turn off everything. And then I'm going to turn on the base layer and the dust layer because I did actually use a blend mode here. So if I click on my dust layer, you can see I'm using the screen blend mode. And just for the sake of showing you that these both work together, if I click on blending, if I select the layer and then I come to my properties dialog box here and I click on blending, screen and screen, they're linked together. So let me change this really quickly. We'll make it something crazy like luminosity. All right. This is saying luminosity. It's just jumbled up because it's in a smaller space, but it does say luminosity. And then I got luminosity over here. So if I go back to screen, you can see that these two are linked together and I can change it in either one of those places. So if for whatever reason you lose sight of your dialog box and you want to change your blend mode for a particular layer, then you can go ahead and hit screen you can use the top layer pane options and it'll change these over here as well as the opacity. So if I wanted to make that less dramatic, I could pull the opacity down, or make it more dramatic, pull it all the way back up. Same way that these sliders work in pretty much any other effect inside of ON1. So with that being said, what I did was I modified the dust layer to the underlying layer. Now, let me go ahead and put this on normal so you can see why this matters. If you look at this, the background to this dust layer or this particle layer, whatever you want to call it, it's all black. Well, I want the black to disappear and I want the image underneath to show through. But because all of the particles are brighter than black, I use the screen blend mode, and essentially that only allows the bright things in your image to shine through, and everything that's under it will show as well, if that makes sense. So since I put the screen blend mode on this dust layer that had the black background, it got rid of the black background and it pulled out the image from underneath, or it allowed the image underneath to be revealed. Man, I hope I explained that well. I think I did. I don't know of any better way of explaining that. But when you start testing these things out, which I highly recommend that you go and do, it will make sense. I promise. You just have to test it out. You have to trust that you can figure this stuff out. And once you start practicing it and getting the repetitions, it's going to make way more sense than any guy on YouTube will ever come up with an explanation to tell you, because your photo edit or your composite is going to be different than someone else's composite in many cases, in which case you will need to know which blend mode you should be selecting. So hopefully that makes sense and is a sense of encouragement. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, oh yeah, I did say I was going to try and blend this in, and this may be a good example. So let me turn this off, all of those, and let's pull this over the everything merged and turn that on. Let me see. Yeah, that one has the borders, so we'll just turn off the border and see if we can make something make sense here. So if I come to the dust and BG stamp layer that we created earlier in Boris Effects that I brought in for this specific tutorial, you can see I just can kind of filter through these blend modes. And I've said this many times in the past, this is one of the best ways to learn how something works, is just to mess around with it. No one's looking. I mean, you're watching me do this, and I'm just showing you how I often learn to use these particular blend modes in my own images. Even though I have a general idea of what each one is doing, most of the time I work based off of what looks cool. So as I'm cycling through here, I'm just inventorying, like, this actually looks kind of cool. I like what it's doing to the image with the black and white layer style. So if I go with that, and what I'm going to try to do is invert this. So if I go to Effects, Add Filter, and then we'll go to Curves. If I click on, or I guess I already had Styles open, I can click on the default here and I can hit Invert. And what it does is it gives me this inversion of our highlights and shadows, or our blacks and whites. So I won't get into that. Anyway, what it allows me to do is essentially give me the opposite of the two colors that are here. All right. So on the color spectrum, I'm getting the opposite of the two colors that are here, which in color theory, this all plays out pretty well. So what I can do is I can come over to my opacity and I can pull this down, and it starts to blend kind of cool. Now, there's so many other things I could also do with this. I don't want to make this this stream too much longer than what it is, but what I'll do is come over to borders, and I just want to kind of hide that border. But since I have this curves blend mode on, I don't think it's actually going to work. Or I'm sorry, not the blend mode, the hue blend mode. The idea of what I want to do is not going to work. So I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do. And this is also my thought process. I think of something and then I run into brick walls, and then I find a way to overcome the thing that I ran into. And that normally takes a lot of time and thought power that will make this stream go so much longer than it needs to. So I'm not going to do that today. But hopefully this gives you an idea. I'm going to turn this one off and turn back on the borders, because I want to show you one last thing before I end the stream. So now that they've included the text, I guess, workflow, text item as its own layer, you can do some really cool things. So I'm going to pull this around, and what I can do, let me just highlight it all, and then I want to pull up on the size here, and I think that'll work. So yeah, we'll say that I like this. I didn't really stylize the text here, but what if I wanted to make this look like it was kind of going through, or it was behind the watch? Well, what I can do is click on the layer mask here, hit the letter O. You can see what it's doing, right? I just get this big white box. Well, if I select erase up here in the layers pane, I can just paint over that E, and I can paint over the M here as well. And it makes it look like this is behind the watch because I'm masking it. And this is very similar to what we have been able to do inside of Photoshop. And there's actually a better way of masking this. So let me show you that really quickly. I'm just going to reset the mask. And instead of using the brush, I'm going to use the line mask tool. And I told you earlier, I use the line mask tool to kind of mask out this particular watch face. So let me show you how I would go about doing this. I would click here, go straight across, probably somewhere to like there, and then come straight across somewhere to about here, come straight somewhere to about there, and then finish my circle or my weird looking triangle thingy. And then before you click to mask in or mask out, what you want to do is hover over the blue lines here, or turquoise lines, and pull your edges out and then move them around. All right. And you're going to do this on all 4 of those corners. So got to hit Command Z because my mouse let go, or I let go of the mouse before I wanted to. And I'm just going to make these come out over here as well. And I'm going to make this come out over here like so. Now, what's important is that you put a little bit of a feather, because you can make it a hard edge, and I'll show you what that looks like. And I want to erase the thing that's in the middle. So I'm just going to click in the middle and it erases that for me. So that's a more precise way of getting a mask with the, well, with anything really. You could do this with text. You could do this with the effects. You could do this with everything. I think the line mask tool is one of the most underutilized tools in ON1, along with a few other tools. But, you know, videos like this and the use of it hopefully will draw your attention to it and make it something that you would consider. All right. Now, what you can also do is, if you say, you know what, I need to feather it, while you still have this particular line mask selected, you can come to the feather and you can feather this as much as you want. And you can see that it's starting to bring back some of that text over the watch face, which I don't really want. I would probably give this maybe a 5 pixel feather, and that just kind of makes it smooth. Hit the check mark, and now I have my watch with the words time warp in the back, and you know, it looks kind of cool. What I will notice or mention, what I would love to be able to do is add a texture to this. Right now, this is pre-release software, so I'm not showing this as a dig to ON1. I'm just showing this as, if you want to add a texture to a particular image, or I'm sorry, to your text, it just doesn't work. It fills up the entire text box because it's recognizing the text box as the layer, not the text independent of the box. And it also puts the texture behind the text itself. So there are some benefits to having it as a layer, and my hope is ON1 will figure this out and give us the ability to put the texture on top of the text, because that opens up so many different possibilities of what we can do inside of ON1. But if you want to do something like that, you'll probably have to take this into Affinity Photo or Photoshop and apply the text. Apply your images to the text that way. So, or at least textures. But other than that, pretty much all of the other options work. You could add in a photo filter, and this is going to give you essentially the face type or the appearance that you would change up here. This gives you the ability to change it down here. But I would not do it this way just because you can get confused pretty easily. I'm still working on figuring out how to use text as a layer. The main thing that I would love to be able to do is add in texture, but you can see that you can at least mask it, and that's kind of cool and helpful. So I'll leave it at that. So that is layers in a nutshell. There will be more content that I make about ON1 Photo Raw and the new layers pane. And I'm sorry that my voice is cracking. Give me 1 second. Had to clear my throat. The layers pane is a very powerful section of ON1, and I think it's going to be beneficial for many people to test out and apply to their own photos, your own photography, especially if you're into building composites. I will have more content around the layers pane because I do use a lot of plugins when or on my computer, and I use ON1 to host many of them. So it's definitely one of those areas that I think it's a natural part of my workflow just because of how ON1 treats plugins or the thing that's rendered in a plugin once it comes back to ON1. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are with layers. Is there something that you would like to see layers do? Is there something you would like to be able to do in ON1 that you think layers would be the answer for? Let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.